Welcome to the audio-described version of Fire in the Mojave Desert, a landscape in transition. The video opens with a series of shots of a dense and diverse Joshua tree forest, with silvery cholla cacti, bushy juniper trees, tall green Joshua trees, and a variety of desert plants and shrubs.
Cima Dome was one of the largest and densest Joshua tree forests in the world. It was really magical.
I thought it was so unique. It was so picturesque, this thick, dense black brush with these Joshua trees coming up through it. I thought that was the coolest vegetation alliance that we had in the entire preserve. I thought that was just phenomenally beautiful.
A map of Southern California showing LA and the boundaries of Joshua Tree National Park and Mojave National Preserve, which then zooms in to just the preserve and shows Cima Dome in the northern half. Lightning ignited a fire in Mojave National Preserve on August 15th of 2020 on Cima Dome. A series of shots of the dome fire burning through the preserve landscape, a distant column of smoke, fires being driven by strong winds across the highway, and flames consuming desert vegetation and Joshua trees during the day and at night. Winds pushed the fire through this beloved wilderness as firefighters worked to slow the progress of the blaze. Many other fires were burning in California at the time, so air assistance was not available for the first few days. The dome fire ended up burning 43,000 acres and over 1 million Joshua trees. 2 shots of the burned landscape with blackened skeletons of Joshua trees, cacti, and other desert shrubs.
When I came out here, I had to prepare myself for the worst, and as you can see, it pretty much was the worst.
A ranger in field uniform is surrounded by the burned landscape. Text on screen, Drew Kaiser, Vegetation Program, Mojave National Preserve.
Miles and miles and miles of just burned landscape.
A park employee sits inside a Jeep with the door open. Text on screen, Deborah Hewson, Science and Resource Stewardship, Mojave National Preserve. This is followed by a time-lapse of cloud shadows moving across the burned landscape, viewed from atop a hill, which slowly fades to black.
It had burned so hot and so intense that it was a moonscape. The blackbrush Joshua tree is gone and it'll never come back.
A ranger stands among a field of dry yellow grasses. Text on screen, Tony Sandrini, Fire Management, Joshua Tree National Park.
Unlike in many forest ecosystems, the desert is not a fire-adapted ecosystem, and fire should not be present.
2 shots of invasive grasses waving in the wind, followed by a shot of a burned cactus and a burned Joshua tree.
It really opens the door to bringing in invasive plants that don't belong here. Our native plants just grow so slowly, take so much time to recover from the process of fire that shouldn't be here anyway, and those non-natives really are able to take advantage of that and come back and take over an area.
A tilt up across a field of dry grasses, including many invasives, followed by a shot of the bottoms of a small bunch of cacti burned by the dome fire.
They'll cause these ecosystems to burn more frequently, and even like the fire-adapted shrubs, the native plants that can withstand some amount of fire, eventually will die out and not be able to return.
Pan across a hillside covered with the remnants of burned Joshua trees, cacti, and shrubs.
Here in Joshua Tree National Park, in contrast to the Mojave Preserve, we have a lot more of the invasive grasses that you see here.
Lightning in a cloudy sky over a Joshua tree grassland, followed by a shot of open desert with small shrubs and no grasses in between.
Historically, when we would have lightning events, those fires would not spread because there was no carrier fields, there was no grasses to move the fire around. So those fires would stay very small and they would go out pretty quickly. Now, as you can see, the grasses have taken over and they become the primary carrier of the fire.
Shot of golden cheatgrass covering the ground between desert shrubs.
So when we get a lightning fire or a human-caused fire, it becomes incredibly difficult for us to stop the fire and keep it small now.
Text on screen. If invasive grasses take over on Cima Dome, as they have in parts of Joshua Tree National Park, that will lead to larger and more frequent fires, fundamentally changing this ecosystem. Rangers at Mojave National Preserve are working to ensure that native plants will regenerate and persist. Drew stands in the burned landscape next to a burned shrub. He leans down to point out a tiny piece of the plant that has resprouted since the fire.
So here's a good fire follower here. This is a Lycium andersonii, boxthorn, and it does really well after fires. You can see it's already starting to resprout just from a small amount of precipitation that happened right after the fire. So that's really what we're going to be watching for is more precipitation, because if it rains out here, then we'll start to see like the native grasses kind of come back, but we really need to see more rain this winter.
2 shots of green shrubs and sprouts coming up out of the sand and other burned plants. Then cut back to Deborah.
We do want to see the Joshua tree persist, so we would like to assist the native vegetation in reestablishing and persisting.
A shot of another green plant resprouting, followed by a time-lapse of a sunset over a Joshua tree grassland savanna landscape.
And I think that if we wind up with something like that, a native grassland Joshua tree, pinyon juniper savanna, that would probably be the ideal outcome.
Text on screen. Dome fire recovery and restoration will take generations. You can help. Stop the spread of invasive species. Visit playcleango.org. Prevent human-caused fires. Volunteer by contacting MOJA_volunteers at nps.gov. Text on screen. Video by Perry Sasnet. Production and editorial assistant Alessandra Puig Santana. Sound effects from Audio Atlas, National Park Service. Additional footage by Alessandra Puig Santana, Christy Rugg. National Park Service arrowhead logo on black background.